Practical joke may have saved my life from Bigfoot. 2019 in late October, just outside of Bennett, Wisconsin. My name is Josh Kay, and this is my story. My house is rather unique in that when you come in the front door, instead of entering into a living room or some sort of greeting room, you enter right into a hallway. The way the place is set up, I suspect it was originally built for housing a group of men because as you enter into the hallway, there are room after room of what could have been separate bedding areas. I use them for other things, of course. The hallway was built a bit wider than what a normal hallway usually is done, and another reason I suspect this place was built to house many men. The hallway is wide enough for two grown men to get past each other without having to turn their bodies or make any effort whatsoever. A great idea for a place built to house many men, but in my case it was a bit of a riddle. What to do with that extra wide hallway? I mean, it was really too narrow to put in any furniture, and yet with its extra wide accommodation it cried for something more than just being a hallway. At the end of the hallway was the kitchen and lounging area, and then beyond it there was the storage closet, and that was the extent of the house. It was very simple, built, but it satisfied my needs quite well. When you got to the end of the hallway where the kitchen lounging area was located, to get into the kitchen, you either had to go into a door on the left or on the right. So when standing in the hallway, if all the doors to all the rooms are shut, it's just a long, dark corridor. I suspect they built it that way so that they could have one doorway to enter the kitchen area and the other to exit. That way there was never a case of someone opening the door on another. It was actually quite a smart way of doing things if your goal was to be efficient. Well, I ended up fixing it up so it would be the last thing anybody would ever expect to see when they entered my place. I installed surround sound. At the end of the hallway, I installed a single blindingly bright light, and I put the audio on a loop that would click on anytime you entered my front door unless I turned it off with an option on my keyring. You may have already guessed what I had set up because this was certainly not the first setup in such a manner. In fact, I learned it from my uncle who lived out in California back in the 70s. Oh, I did add my own special touch to the circumstance involved, however, and that was a fan that would click on after the blinding light, giving the effect of wind being blown at you. So I'll get back to this in a little while. Now understand where I live at. There are periodic sightings of Bigfoot and even the occasional dogman, though that is generally further to the east of my location. Bennett isn't all that far from Lake Superior, and it's about an equal distance to the Minnesota border as it is to the Big Lake. My place backs up to a state forest called Brule River State Forest. So I get a lot of critters, and sometimes I get unknown sounds coming from the forest. I have never had any trouble from any of the animals that live in the area. Sure, I have had some frustrating visits from raccoons. The occasional skunk will stink the area up. Birds tend to piss me off in the mornings because they wake me up too early, but that's the extent of the problems I've ever had with the critters. And as for hunting, the game was very ample. Nearly every time I went hunting, I came home with a bounty. I live in my home by myself. My wife left me about 10 years ago, long before I moved into this place. The nearest neighbor is about half a mile down the road. It's actually more than just a neighbor. It's a small collection of houses that were built along a new road that was created just for the purpose of the houses. It dead ends less than a mile. There are probably 6 or 8 houses there, but half a mile is a pretty good distance. And plus, I'm not certain they are all occupied. Some of the people might have been away on vacation or simply had chose to stay with a friend in the city that night. My point is, I doubt that they heard the commotion that night when it happened. If you haven't already imagined it, the land between my house and those houses is a forest with mostly thick underbrush, which I imagine works great blocking noises coming from beyond it. So basically, I was on my own. Things happened slowly over a period of maybe 3 weeks to a month. Understand, I had lived here for probably 6 years and never had a problem, although there were times when I felt I was being watched. Now, I consider that to be natural when you live near a forest. I'm not a ghost chaser, and in fact, I am a lot more worried about running into a bear than I am ever seeing any kind of Bigfoot dogman, or Native American boogeyman such as the Wendigo. And if you check, you will find very few deaths have been attributed to the boogeyman and his friends, while the number of bear attacks are very real and they occur every year. The way I look at it is that if any of those other things do exist, well, apparently the chances of seeing one are about the same as winning the lottery or getting struck by lightning. The point being that even if they do exist, the chances you're going to run into one are very, very unlikely. So worrying about it is akin to spending that lottery winnings before you actually get the winning ticket. Now that said, in 2019 things had a different feel to them that fall. For one thing, the animal noises coming from the forest were different. There was a wail that never sounded like it was near. There were cries like a woman was in trouble. I assumed that was due to a bobcat, possibly in heat. I can't remember if they sound that way in heat or for some other reason, but I do know that they are well known for sounding like a woman screaming at times. Then there's the North American red fox, or maybe it was a gray one. I do figure at least one of the two are out in the forest out back. The coyotes are certainly there. So there exist a number of possible culprits, yet this was something that new to me. Oftentimes when I'd be out hunting, there was some crashing through the thick parts of the forest, which I never had any inclination to head towards to find out what it was that was charging through that underbrush with such apparent success. My best guess was a black bear, maybe a big black bear. Although when it comes to crashing through the forest, it could also have been a big buck or maybe an elk. He or she seemed to be hanging around. Weekends were when I usually went out hunting. From the end of September to the middle of October, there was something out there with me every time I went out. I could just feel it watching me. I constantly lived with the fear that the damn thing was going to come charging out of the underbrush at me. But there was no bear. What was really weird was I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, and it would sound like it was headed straight for my location, and then it would just stop. There I would be, rifle aimed in the direction of the noise, and the bear never came. I never got any game either. It's very hard to hunt and stay focused when a big part of you is worried about a big bear who's going to come out charging out of the underbrush. Whatever it was, it did not show itself, although many times it bluffed. I remember one Saturday I'd been out for over half of the day. On that particular day, the sass had not been around, but it showed up shortly after I had stopped to eat lunch. As such, the idea I had gained the attention of a black bear by it smelling the sandwich I had just eaten was very believable. There were even a few grunts, which I again thought were due to the black bear being in the vicinity. I have heard or read about some Bigfoot seekers claiming they will sometimes mimic the sounds made by other animals. Looking back on things, I now realize it might have been a Sasquatch making sounds like a black bear. The bottom line is the thing, whether bear or Bigfoot, kept me anxious every time I went out hunting. I wasn't out there for shits and grins. I went out there to get something to eat because I was hungry. Sure, I had enough supplies that I could go out and get nothing and come back and still have food to fix. But that only works the first couple times you end up empty-handed. At some point, the novelty goes away and you're just left with a few choices in the cupboard and a forest full of tasty critters, all of which you are being denied opportunity to bag. This particular time I was on a trail path and the surrounding underbrush was very thick and thus almost forcing those traveling the path to stay on it. Now despite that, the sound of something forcing its way through the underbrush was evident and growing stronger, indicating it was headed for me. It was coming at the path from a 90-degree angle, which meant it was coming through that thick underbrush. The circumstance was very wearing on the nerves because once it sounded like it was very close, and then it never came close enough I could see it. When I moved, it moved. And when I stopped, so did it. Despite not being able to put my eyes on it, the sound of it breathing was as apparent as was the fact that it was moving through that underbrush. It sounded like the breathing was of something big, something powerful. I genuinely considered it being a big old elk, or maybe even a big white-tailed buck. Why such a prey animal like an elk or white-tailed deer would be stalking me was another question all to itself. That part I was willing to contemplate once I was far enough away from that breathing and I didn't have to hear it any longer. The simple fact of the matter was that something was out there, not far away, and it was tracking me, not the other way around. It absolutely loved to intimidate me. That much was obvious. Every weekend when I went out, it was there. Maybe not at first, but it would catch up to where I was at and then start that crashing through the underbrush again. It got so that I no longer felt safe taking a shot at something because I feared that that would be the moment the creature was waiting for. The moment it would break through the underbrush and charge me. So I went from being unfocused to literally not being able to fire my weapon for fear I wouldn't be ready for the attacking bear. So I retreated to my home. That was when the harassment started. The first time was while I was trying to sleep at night. There would be stuff thrown against the side of the house. When that would happen, I would step outside with my rifle and it would stop until I went back inside. Then it would start again. This was very frustrating. I eventually found myself yelling at it in the darkness. I cursed it. I snarled at it. I growled at it. Nothing seemed to bring out into the open where I could confront it. I think towards the end I had been tormented so much that maybe I could have beaten a Bigfoot. That's how angry and frustrated with it I had become. Sort of like when you have younger siblings, they may grow up to become bigger than you ended up, but because you were the older sibling growing up, you know you will always be able to take them. Or at least that's what you believe in your core because it's always been true before. And plus, like I used to say, pride alone will carry me through that day. Well, when that sibling pisses you off to the point you worry about showing restraint when you get your hands on them, is much how I felt about this particular Bigfoot. Keep in mind, up until all this going on, I just thought I had a troublesome bear that needed to be weathered, endured, survived. Eventually, it would either lose interest and go away, or, at worst case scenario, hibernation couldn't be that far away. I mean, could it? It was almost at the end of October. The days were still warm, but the nights had become quite cold. We hadn't caught a hard freeze yet, but there had been enough close calls to kill off all my tomato plants. Admittedly, they had been finished producing fruit for quite a while anyway. Finally, the weekend before Halloween, I had an experience which raised the level of anxiety beyond a comfortable existence. It was overcast the whole weekend. Mist or rain was the only thing on the menu, and it was plentiful supply. I slept late into the Saturday, not waking up until noon had come and gone. If I'm completely honest, I had a few drinks the night before, which helped me zonk out until that next afternoon. I don't know if the noise woke me up or if it started after I had got up. Stuff was being thrown against the side of the house again. Just little stuff. I suspected the bear was probably out there kicking up the ground at the side of the house. In this kind of mess the weather was providing, I had no intention of going outside and dealing with a black bear. The windows in the house were too small for a bear to get in through, so as long as I kept the front door shut, that bear wasn't going to be a problem. He probably smelled the food inside, and I made a mental note to start being more careful about what I was leaving out, even if it was still inside the house. People are far too trusting that a pane of glass will keep them safe from the creatures of the outside world, when the truth told is that even without going through glass, that I could bust my way into the most modern built homes in less than 5 minutes, give me a sledgehammer. This house was built better than that, however. Most of it wasn't finished, so you could see what had been used to construct the place, and it had been a lot more than the flimsy stuff that they use in today's homes. This was a house that could withstand an attack from a black bear, or worse. The catch to all that, though, is you need to be a bear, because they don't turn the handle on the door and let themselves inside. Car doors are different. They don't require the handle to be turned. They just need to be lifted, in case that crossed your mind. Plus, if I had thought there was any chance that my house could be compromised because of the door latch, I would have locked it. But bears don't turn handles, at least not the majority of them. Naturally, now looking back on things, I realize I should have locked the door. Just realized I had no worry of a human being bothering me. I don't have much, and the house is as humbly built as could be. I mentioned it wasn't even completely finished inside. I bet this place was built to house a log crew or some other crew of all, or mostly all men. Everything about the place was clearly built for purpose and not appearance. Before I go on, I should note that I'm not entirely positive it was a Bigfoot that entered my home. There is that 1 in a million chance that I did have a black bear turn the handle on my door and let itself in. I can't say for sure because I was busy trying to find some place to go, and I didn't care where. I just wanted to be anywhere but in that location when whatever it was that was going to come through that door came through that door. And I knew it was going to be pissed off because of the practical joke I mentioned at the beginning of the story. Now, to bring you up to speed on my practical joke. As mentioned, I learned this from my uncle's place when I was a kid. He had a very similar setup. Being I was just a kid, so I didn't know what to expect when he sent me into his hallway. Suddenly, a pair of cabinet doors swung open at the end of the hallway, and I was hit by a blinding light, while at the same time I was suffocated by the deafening noise of a freight train charging straight at me. Well, I nearly peed my pants. It was terrifying. So I had to set one up at my place when I saw this extra wide hallway. It was perfect the way you had to enter the hallway before you did anything else. And I would be remiss not to mention the very affordability of the joke was incredibly appealing. I mean, when I thought of all the different ways to approach the situation and what to do with that hallway, the joke was not only an interesting way to go, but it was also the most affordable. So that night, when the little stuff being thrown against the house eventually became big stuff, I was hunkered down in the kitchen. That bear could have thrown boulders at the house. I wasn't going anywhere. The later into the night it became, the worse the banging on the side of the house. And I began to wonder if I really could stand up to such a beating. Bang, and then again and again. It was so loud I really did wonder if the people living over in those houses a half mile away could hear what was going on. What I found very interesting was I never heard so much as a growl. No roar. The only noise the animal ever made was noise it intended for me to be aware. I loaded my rifle and kept it in my arms as the night went on. The banging was starting to drive me crazy, but I knew better than to go out into the dark through all that rain and mist and think I was going to deal with an angry black bear. Better to wait this out. I'm not a genius, and I'm certainly not an expert at the art of hunting something, which is hunting you, but I'm not stupid either. Never ever go into a battle against something that can see in the dark conditions better than you are equipped to do, because it will definitely end badly for you 99% of the time. For 3 hours I endured stuff being thrown against the side of the house, but I never was inclined to step outside. Finally, I guess I fell asleep despite the banging, because all I know is I was woke up very rudely by the sound of my front door crashing open, which set off the practical joke. The next thing I know, I'm listening to my surround sound speakers blast the sound of an oncoming freight train into the blinding, well-lit hallway. Now, I have been coy about acting like I didn't know it was a Bigfoot because that much is true. But again, I'm not stupid. As soon as I heard the front door crash open, I immediately knew that I wasn't dealing with a black bear. I was dealing with one of them. That in turn caused me to bust out laughing. All those hours of anxiety building up to it was incredible. I was able to fall asleep, but once awakened and then realizing the entire scope of the situation, I broke into laughter. I laughed because I could not stop myself from picturing how that must have went down. It was genuinely funny, but then add in the anxiety and then the relief from that anxiety, because believe me, that I was that certain that if it was a Bigfoot, which I believe it just the American version of a mountain ape, that if it was him, then I knew I was safe. There was no way a simple-minded creature would recover from such a fright in such a short amount of time that it would come back. Obviously, I was correct, since I didn't see it again nor have any clues that it was ever around the place or myself again. Mr. Bigfoot must have grown tired of throwing rocks against the side of the house, and then frustrated when I didn't step outside to see what was throwing stuff at the house. So he eventually works his way around over to where the front door is, and he finds the doorknob. Now, an animal like a bear isn't going to know to turn the handle to open the latch, but a Bigfoot has more intelligence and that opposable thumb. He's going to try everything, including turning the knob, and that is when things went pretty straightforward. Bigfoot realizes he can get into the house, so as soon as he opens the door a little, he smashes it on open with his might. And that's when it triggered the autoplay option, causing the freight train sound to blast into the hallway while at the same time kicking on that high-powered fan, sending a rush of air, and the blinding bright light comes on at the end of the hallway. I bet that poor Sasquatch is still trying to get his heart to stop pounding. Imagine throwing open a door, expecting to scare the crap out of all behind that door, and then hearing the screaming noise of a freight train coming at you while feeling that rush of air from the high-powered fan, and while all that's going on, you're being blinded by that very bright light at the end of that very dark hallway. Of course, I burst out laughing. I was in stitches all night. Just imagine it. I cannot help but laugh about it every time I think about it, because the situation was originally so dire. Yes, I thought it was a black bear, but when I realized what the actual situation was, it was just instant bust-a-gut time. And just as instantly, I knew that I was never going to have trouble with that particular Bigfoot ever again. If you think about it, there are probably very few things in this world a Bigfoot fears. I mean, those things can take a car hitting them, and so far, every time that I've heard of, they have been able to get up and remove themselves from the scene of the crime. 18-wheelers are probably one of the few things in current times which the Bigfoot respects due to the size difference. And following that line of thinking, then the obvious next thing bigger is the freight train. Plus, they're very likely to be familiar with trains. I know for myself, the first thing that crosses my mind when I hear a train whistle is respect. Everybody knows you're not going to win a game of chicken when playing against a freight train. In fact, if I were tasked with coming up with something to counteract a freight train, the only thing I could think of, short of a lot of explosives, would be another freight train. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, I must have woke up a long time sleeping emotion. I mean, how much can something like Bigfoot really have to fear? Yes, they're shy, but I doubt they're ever really afraid for their lives unless maybe they run onto a man that has a rifle. But a freight train would do it. Since it's been a few years now, I can say with some confidence that in the case of that particular Bigfoot, I won't be seeing him again. At least not coming around my house anyway. In fact, I would bet I cured that particular Bigfoot of ever crashing into anybody's home ever again. Oh, and by the way, all those times he or she rushed me in that underbrush trying to intimidate me, karma, baby. I still laugh every time I imagine the look on that creature's face when he burst through that front door and thought he just met an oncoming freight train. Thanks for coming in. Please subscribe and note that anytime I post something that although I have my channel providing the cryptic stuff, that I am also providing some children's stories. Anytime you will be notified of a new posting, there will be at least one of each. So if you're only interested in the one thing, it will be there. I thought about splitting things up, but it seemed counterproductive since I've not yet reached enough subscribers to monetize the one channel. There's no sense in trying to chase two. Thanks again for stopping in.